All right, this is a very short presentation on currency exchange, and at the end we'll talk about OPEC. Not a lot to say, so let's get right into it. Currency is something that is assigned value and can be used to purchase goods and services in a market. That is a big fancy way of saying currency is another word for money. And because different countries have different forms of currency or different forms of money, if you're going to trade with those countries, you got to find out what your money is worth in terms of what their money is worth. Otherwise, you're going to have a very hard time buying things in their country or trading with that country. So you have to make that conversion. Next slide. Here is some examples of different types of currency from the region we're studying. You can see the Afghani, which is from Afghanistan, the Turkish lira, the Iranian rial. With the Iranian rial has a picture of the Ayatollah, which was the religious leader of Iran that we talked about when we were doing the government section. Next slide. All right. What the currency of a nation is worth in terms of another country's currency is called the exchange rate. And the example I used was the one when I went to Mexico and found out that even though a dollar converted into 3,000 pesos, it still bought the same Coca-Cola. All right. So the bottle of Coca-Cola that I got was still $1 or 3,000 pesos. I didn't gain anything from the fact that it just had a higher number associated with it. It still bought the same stuff. All right. The example given here is, an exchange rate of 3 Turkish lira converts into 1 US dollar. All right. So the purpose of this is to make trade easier around the world. All right. Establishing this exchange rate so you know what the stuff is worth in your money versus what it's worth in their money. And that way there's not a bunch of confusion and people feeling like they've gotten ripped off or anything like that. Next slide. This is an example of what you would find for the exchange rate. No guarantees that these are absolutely current because exchange rate can change, fairly frequently. Won't be very dramatic, but it can change. It would be kind of fun to convert some money into Iranian rials. I mean, come on, $1 equals 30,568 rial. Next slide. All right. So enough about exchange rate. Let's talk about OPEC a little bit. Now, we talked about OPEC back at the beginning of the year when we did one of our station activities. So with this, we're going to be kind of reviewing it just a little bit, but it does get into the history. Next slide. All right. OPEC starts in 1960. Most of the countries that are involved in OPEC at the time are in the Middle East: Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. But then you get Venezuela, which is over in South America. But they all kind of group up and they decide that they're going to basically work together to regulate the price of oil. All right. That way, each country is selling the oil at the same price. It's stable. It makes sure that everybody's going to get their proper share of the money there. And they set the price and amount of oil produced by its member nations. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, it's kind of when they say they set the price and amount and everything, OPEC kind of will sometimes decide to do something, and then one of its member nations will say, I'm not doing that. I'm making money I want right now. I don't need to do what you're saying. So OPEC is very much, not a very strong central government for that grouping. And I use the word government. It's not a country, but it's not a central power system there for them where one person said or one country says and everybody else has to do it. It's mainly just like, hey, let's do this, and it's still possible for one nation to disagree and do something else. Next slide. Here's the OPEC conference in 1960. Unless you've been to the doctor that day, don't wear your sunglasses inside. Next slide. All right. The purpose of OPEC, again, is to regulate the price of oil, and they do that by increasing or decreasing the amount of oil each nation produces. You guys were awesome on the presentation Wednesday when I asked you what happens when you reduce the amount of something that's available. Every class got it where they said price goes up. So if there's less of something, price goes up. If there's more of something, price goes down. And that's how OPEC controls the price, by controlling the amount that's available. All right. Now, before 1960, you had way more oil than you had people needing oil. So the price for oil was very, very low, and these oil producing countries did not make a lot of money. OPEC forms, and all of a sudden you have dialed back the production where it's not as easy to get it anymore. And all of a sudden the demand goes up, and anytime demand goes up, price goes up. So oil prices rise, and these oil producing countries that we've been talking about make money, a lot of money. Next slide. All right. OPEC now has about 13 members, and those countries together combine for about 42% of the world's oil production, but they have 73% of the known oil reserves, which means, of all the oil that's known to be in the earth today, OPEC is in control of almost 3/4 of it, but they only produce little under half of the world's oil, which means they're really kind of holding stuff back, and that's how they regulate the price. For the most part, OPEC has been very successful for its members because of the fact that they're able to prevent any kind of other political thing from getting involved in this. OPEC kind of operates independently of all these different issues that you have in the Middle East. I mean, you're talking about a bunch of countries that don't always get along. In the best of situations, I mean, we mentioned Iraq and Kuwait are both founding members, and they've not gotten along, which we've discussed. So this OPEC has really kind of helped keep those kind of issues out of the oil discussion so that the countries can still make money. Next slide. And this is a world map, and you can see the different countries in the world that are involved here. Obviously, you've got the ones that are in the middle here. If you look in the Middle East, you'll see Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and then because Kuwait's there, you can see that. And then you've got the other little ones like UAE and other ones in the Persian Gulf. Go over here to South America, you've got Venezuela. You get down into South and East Asia, you've got Indonesia down there, that island chain. And then you got a bunch of them through Africa up towards the top. You've got Libya, countries like that. So OPEC, again, has spread beyond its original 6 members. And that's about all I've got to say about that. Finished.